February 16th, 1943. Yokosuka Naval Arsenal, Japan. Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda stood perfectly still, his white naval uniform immaculate despite the humid air of the hangar. Before him sat the object that had occupied his thoughts for weeks, an American F4U Corsair fighter, its distinctive inverted gull wings intact despite the crash landing that had delivered it into Japanese hands. Engineers in white coats swarmed around the aircraft like surgeons around a patient, measuring, documenting, and disassembling with methodical precision. Genda, the tactical genius behind Pearl Harbor's air attack plan, had seen every Allied aircraft in the Pacific theater. None had disturbed him like this one. His mind calculated the implications with cold clarity as Chief Engineer Takeo Yamada approached, clipboard in hand. "Your assessment?" Genda asked quietly. Yamada hesitated, glancing at the notes in his hand. "The engine alone produces 2,000 horsepower. Our best fighter, the Zero, produces barely 1,100. The airframe is entirely metal. With machined tolerances we cannot match with our current manufacturing capabilities. The armor protection—" He paused. "Their pilots can survive hits that would kill ours instantly." Genda's expression remained impassive, but his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the hilt of his ceremonial sword. "And your conclusion?" Yamada bowed slightly, then spoke the words that would haunt Japan's Naval Aviation Command. "We have encountered an opponent we cannot match. Not with current resources, not with current methods, not with our entire industrial capacity." In that moment, in a quiet hangar thousands of miles from the nearest battlefield, Japan's naval air strategy suffered a blow as devastating as any carrier sinking. The F4U Corsair represented more than a superior fighter. It revealed the insurmountable industrial and technological gap between America and Japan. The saga had begun 2 weeks earlier when Lieutenant Nathan Thompson of VF-17 Squadron ditched his damaged Corsair in shallow water near Rabaul after a high-altitude engine malfunction. Though Thompson was captured, his aircraft remained largely intact, a prize beyond measure for Japanese intelligence. Within 48 hours, Imperial Japanese Navy salvage teams had recovered the fighter and begun the delicate process of transporting it to Japan for analysis. What they found would shake the confidence of Japan's most seasoned aviation experts. The Corsair was not just another fighter. It was a glimpse into an industrial capability that Japan could scarcely comprehend, let alone match. The Pratt & Whitney R2-1800 double wasp engine alone represented technology beyond Japan's manufacturing ability. Each cylinder had been precision machined to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch. The supercharger system that allowed the engine to maintain power at high altitudes incorporated alloys Japan could not produce in quantity. Even the spark plugs revealed a level of precision manufacturing that Japanese engineers could only admire, not replicate. "We can perhaps build a handful of engines of this quality," reported Yamada after 3 days of examination, "but we cannot mass-produce them. The Americans are building hundreds monthly." The airframe told a similar story. The Corsair's aluminum skin was uniformly thick, with perfectly aligned rivets set by machine rather than by hand. Japanese aircraft, including the vaunted Zero, featured handcrafted components assembled by skilled workers, an approach that produced excellent individual aircraft but severely limited production capacity. Rear Admiral Sadatoshi Tomioka, head of the operations section of the Imperial Japanese Navy General Staff, visited the examination hangar personally after receiving the initial reports. His face darkened as Chief Engineer Yamada walked him through the findings. "The Americans have created an industrial system we did not believe possible," Yamada explained, showing the Admiral a wing section. Every part is interchangeable. Their factories do not build individual aircraft. They build thousands of identical components that can be assembled into aircraft by workers with minimal training. Tomioka's response was telling. We have been measuring our success by victory counts, while they have been building an industrial juggernaut. The technical disparity extended beyond manufacturing. The Corsair's armament, 6 50-caliber machine guns capable of firing at a combined rate of 6,000 rounds per minute, outmatched anything in Japan's arsenal. The hydraulic systems, the electrical systems, even the rubber compounds used in seals and gaskets reflected access to raw materials Japan increasingly lacked as Allied blockades tightened. By March 5th, the examination team had completed their initial assessment. The report, marked Most Secret, was hand-delivered to Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet. The document's conclusions were stark. The aircraft represents a level of industrial capacity and technical sophistication that exceeds our current and projected capabilities. Even if designs of equal performance could be developed, our industrial base cannot mass-produce such aircraft in the quantities the Americans appear capable of delivering. Yamamoto, who had studied in America and warned against war with the United States, received the report with grim vindication. I fear all we have done, he reportedly told his staff, is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve. The technical report included estimates of American production capacity based on manufacturing marks and serial numbers found on the Corsair's components. The numbers were staggering. While Japan struggled to produce 25 fighters per month at a single factory, evidence suggested American plants were producing 28 Corsairs daily. And the Corsair was just one of several fighter types in full production. For the men who had planned Pearl Harbor, the surprise attack meant to cripple American naval power long enough for Japan to secure its resource objectives. These production figures represented the collapse of their strategic assumptions. The Americans were not merely replacing their losses. They were creating air power at a rate that would soon overwhelm Japan's ability to resist, regardless of the skill of her pilots or the tactical brilliance of her commanders. March 22, 1943. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters, Tokyo. A select group of naval officers and civilian experts gathered around a large table. The room had been swept for listening devices, the windows covered, the doors guarded. On the table lay photographs, technical diagrams, and material samples from the captured Corsair. Among those present were the Navy's top aircraft designers, production engineers, and operational planners. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa opened the meeting without preamble. Gentlemen, we are here to address the implications of the American F4U Corsair fighter and what it reveals about our strategic position. Chief Engineer Yamada will present the technical assessment. Yamada stood and distributed folders containing his team's findings. The Corsair represents American industrial capability at its peak, he began. Its performance exceeds our best fighters in speed, climb rate, and armament. But the true revelation lies not in its performance, but in its construction. For the next hour, Yamada detailed the manufacturing methods evident in the Corsair. He passed around metal samples showing the precision machining, photographs of complex components mass-produced to exact specifications, and stress test results demonstrating the superior metallurgy. To build a single comparable aircraft is within our capability, Yamada concluded. To mass-produce them is not. Our entire aviation industry currently produces approximately 12,000 aircraft annually across all types. Based on production evidence and intelligence reports, the Americans appear capable of producing over 100,000 aircraft per year, with quality superior to our best efforts. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Then, Jiro Horikoshi, chief designer of the Zero fighter, spoke for the first time. "There is another factor we must consider," he said quietly. "The Americans achieved this production with their young men fighting overseas. Their factories are staffed increasingly by women and older men, people we would not consider part of the industrial workforce. Their system not only outproduces ours, it does so while absorbing fewer of their young men." This observation struck at a fundamental weakness in Japan's war economy. With a population half the size of America's and a far smaller industrial base, Japan had to maintain both a fighting force and a skilled manufacturing workforce from the same limited pool of young men. Every skilled worker in a factory meant one fewer soldier or sailor in the field. America faced no such constraint. Commander Masatake Okumiya, who had analyzed combat reports from frontline units, spoke next. "The operational implications are already evident. 6 months ago, our pilots reported American fighters as inferior. 3 months ago, they reported them as equal. Today, they report them as superior, not individually, but en masse. Where we once faced dozens, we now face hundreds." Admiral Ozawa nodded grimly. "This is the mathematics of defeat. Continue, Commander." Okumiya placed a chart on the table showing aircraft loss ratios. In 1942, we lost approximately 1 aircraft for every 3 American aircraft shot down. By January 1943, that ratio had reversed. We now lose 3 aircraft for every American aircraft destroyed. Our pilot losses follow the same pattern, but with a critical difference. The Americans are replacing both aircraft and pilots faster than we can destroy them, while our losses are increasingly irreplaceable. The Zero had once been Japan's great equalizer, a fighter so maneuverable and long-ranged that it had dominated the early Pacific War, despite Japan's industrial disadvantages. The Corsair represented the moment when quality advantages could no longer compensate for quantity disparities. America had achieved both superior quality and overwhelming quantity. As the meeting concluded, Admiral Ozawa summarized their position with brutal clarity. "Gentlemen, we have been measuring this conflict in the wrong units. We counted victories in battles. The Americans count production in factories. Unless we find a strategy that negates their industrial advantage, the outcome is mathematically inevitable." April 11, 1943. Dai-ichi Kaigun Koku Gijutsu Sho, 1st Naval Air Technical Arsenal, Yokosuka. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima walked slowly around the partially disassembled Corsair, his expression thoughtful. As Japan's leading fighter instructor and a veteran of the China conflict, Nakajima had been summoned to evaluate the American fighter from a pilot's perspective. What he saw disturbed him deeply. "The cockpit is designed for survival," he noted to the arsenal's chief designer, Doi Takeo. "The armored seat, the self-sealing fuel tanks, the bulletproof windscreen, all emphasize pilot protection." Takeo nodded. "Very different from our philosophy." Indeed, Japanese fighter design had prioritized range, maneuverability, and lightweight construction, achieved partly by eliminating protective features. The Zero carried neither armor nor self-sealing tanks, making it extraordinarily vulnerable to even minor battle damage. A single bullet through a Zero's fuel tank or pilot was often fatal. "Their approach reveals a fundamental difference in thinking," Nakajima continued. "We design our fighters to achieve victory through superior performance. They design theirs to survive combat long enough for superior numbers to guarantee victory. It is the difference between focusing on the individual duel and focusing on the entire war." Nakajima had requested permission to fly the captured Corsair, but the examination team denied this. The aircraft was too valuable as an intelligence source to risk in flight. Instead, he spent days in the cockpit, manipulating controls, studying systems, and imagining how the fighter would respond in combat scenarios. His conclusions, delivered to Naval Headquarters on April 15th, were stark. "We have never encountered its equal. The Corsair can outclimb our Zero above 15,000 feet, outdive it at all altitudes, and outrun it by at least 60 miles per hour. While we retain an advantage in turning radius, the American fighter can dictate the terms of engagement through superior speed and climbing ability. Most significantly, it can sustain damage that would destroy a Zero instantly." Nakajima's report included an assessment of tactical implications. "Our current fighter tactics emphasize turning battles at medium altitudes, where our aircraft hold advantages. The Corsair, like other new American fighters, will refuse such engagements. They will use their superior power to attack from above, make a single high-speed pass, then climb beyond our ability to pursue. Against such tactics, our current aircraft and training methods are increasingly ineffective." The captured Corsair continued to yield its secrets throughout April and May. Metallurgists analyzed its alloys, electronics specialists studied its radio equipment, armament experts tested its gun systems. Each examination revealed not just technical details, but glimpses into the industrial might that had created it. One junior engineer, after examining the Corsair's landing gear assembly, noted in his report, "Each component bears evidence of machine tooling so precise that parts could be exchanged between aircraft without adjustment. Our manufacturing methods cannot achieve such consistency without individual fitting by skilled craftsmen, limiting our production capacity." This observation highlighted a crucial difference between Japanese and American industrial approaches. Japanese manufacturing relied heavily on skilled craftsmen performing precise handwork, an approach that produced excellent individual products but severely limited output. American mass production employed machine tools operated by less skilled workers to produce standardized components in vast quantities. By late May, the examination had yielded a comprehensive understanding of the Corsair's capabilities and construction. The resulting 400-page technical analysis became required reading for Japan's aviation leadership. Its introduction, written by Rear Admiral Tomioka, did not mince words. This aircraft represents not merely a superior fighter, but evidence of an industrial capacity against which we have no effective counter. It is the product of a system capable of outproducing our entire aviation industry with a single factory. The captured Corsair was eventually transferred to the Kasumigara airfield for storage alongside other Allied aircraft being studied. There, it became an object of both technical interest and psychological significance, a physical reminder of the industrial gulf separating Japan from its principal adversary. For the engineers and officers who had examined it, the Corsair represented a turning point in their understanding of the war. Technical superiority could be achieved through brilliant design and skilled craftsmanship, as Japan had demonstrated with the Zero. But industrial superiority on the American scale created a different kind of advantage, one that accumulated mathematically with each passing month, as production figures compounded like interest. Commander Minoru Genda, who had seen the Corsair on its arrival and followed the examination process, perhaps best summarized its significance in his private diary. "Today, I understood fully what it means to fight America. We are not fighting an enemy military. We are fighting an enemy economy. And against such a foe, tactical victories merely postpone defeat. They cannot prevent it." Factory director Chikuhei Nakajima stood beneath the harsh electric lights of the Nakajima aircraft assembly floor, watching workers hand-fit components to the frame of an A6M50 fighter. The contrast with the American manufacturing methods revealed by the Corsair examination, could not have been more stark. Here, skilled craftsmen meticulously adjusted each part, checking alignments by eye, filing metal by hand to achieve proper fit. "How many complete airframes today?" Nakajima asked his production manager. "7, Director. We hope for 8 tomorrow if the aluminum shipment arrives." 7 fighters. A week earlier, Nakajima had received an intelligence report estimating that Vaught's Connecticut factory was producing 28 Corsairs daily, 4 times his plant's output in a single shift. And the Americans operated multiple shifts, 7 days a week. The mathematics were brutal. In the time it took his factory to produce 7 Zeros, Vought produced 196 Corsairs. Across all American plants making fighters, Republic Aviation building Thunderbolts, North American making Mustangs, Lockheed producing Lightnings, the daily output exceeded 300 aircraft. Japan's entire monthly fighter production across all manufacturers was barely 600. Nakajima had spent weeks studying the reports from the captured Corsair examination. What disturbed him most wasn't the aircraft's superior performance or its advanced metallurgy. It was the evidence of mass production methods that Japan could not replicate. "They are not making airplanes," he told his chief engineer that evening. "They are making parts, thousands of identical parts that can be assembled by workers with minimal training. We are still making each aircraft individually, like craftsmen building fine furniture." The American approach required enormous initial investment in machine tools, jigs, and fixtures, an investment Japan had neither the industrial capacity nor raw materials to match in wartime. The Corsair's wing spars, for example, were produced on massive extrusion presses that stamped out identical components by the thousand. Japan possessed no such presses and lacked the industrial infrastructure to build them while fighting a war. This production disparity translated directly to battlefield realities. As Naval Intelligence Officer Commander Toshikazu Ohmai later wrote, "By mid-1943, our pilots were increasingly overwhelmed not by superior skill, but by simple numerical odds. Where our veterans once faced a single opponent, they now routinely faced 5 or 6. Even the most skilled duelist will fall when surrounded by multiple adversaries." Lieutenant Sadamu Komachi, a Zero pilot who survived 57 combat missions, described this transformation in a post-war interview. "In early battles, we faced P-40 Warhawks and F-4F Wildcats, aircraft we could outmaneuver and outfight. Then came the Corsairs and Hellcats. They appeared not in small numbers, but in vast swarms. They had the altitude advantage, the speed advantage, and most importantly, the numerical advantage. It was like fighting a flood with a sword." The Japanese naval leadership struggled to formulate an effective response to this industrial disparity. At a July conference at Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters, officers considered options ranging from increased kamikaze tactics to radical aircraft redesigns. Captain Aichiro Jo, who had reviewed the Corsair examination reports, offered a sobering assessment. "Gentlemen," he began, "we must recognize that this is not merely a technical problem to be solved with better aircraft designs. It is a fundamental industrial capacity problem. The Americans have created an aircraft superior to our best fighter, and they produce it in quantities we cannot match even with our simplest designs. Even if we could somehow design an aircraft superior to the Corsair, we cannot build enough to matter." This reality forced Japan into a strategic corner from which there was no escape. Unable to match American production, Japanese leadership increasingly turned to tactics that maximized the impact of their dwindling resources. Tactics that grew increasingly desperate as the material imbalance worsened. Vice Admiral Takijiro Onishi, who would later become the primary architect of the kamikaze program, first proposed organized suicide attacks after reviewing the production disparity revealed by the Corsair examination. "If we cannot match their production," he reportedly argued, "we must make each of our aircraft count for more than one of theirs. A plane that crashes deliberately into an enemy vessel can achieve what 10 planes might not accomplish with conventional attacks." The captured Corsair thus indirectly contributed to the development of Japan's most desperate tactic, a measure born from the recognition that conventional aerial warfare against American industrial might had become mathematically impossible. By August 1943, the examination of the Corsair had yielded its final lessons. Engineers had disassembled it down to the smallest components, tested its materials, analyzed its design features, and documented everything in exhaustive technical reports. These reports circulated among Japan's aviation leadership, each reading deepening the recognition of what they faced. Jiro Horikoshi, the brilliant engineer who had designed the Zero, spent 3 days reviewing the Corsair reports in his office at Mitsubishi. His diary entry from August 19th reveals his thoughts. "What most impresses me is not any particular technical feature, though many are admirable, but the industrial system that produced it. The Americans build complex fighters the way we build simple radios. They have transformed aircraft manufacturing from a specialized craft into a mass production industry. We cannot match this under current conditions, perhaps not under any conditions." Horikoshi's assessment proved prescient. Despite heroic efforts to increase production, including moving factories underground to escape bombing and employing women and children in manufacturing roles traditionally held by men, Japan never approached American production rates. By 1944, as American bombing of the Japanese homeland intensified, aircraft production actually declined despite desperate efforts to increase it. The examination of the captured Corsair represented a critical psychological turning point. Before, Japanese military leaders could maintain the fiction that superior tactics, training, and fighting spirit could overcome American material advantages. The Corsair revealed this as delusion. No amount of tactical brilliance or personal sacrifice could overcome a 5-to-1 numerical disadvantage in aircraft, especially when the enemy aircraft were individually superior. Commander Masatake Okumiya, who had analyzed hundreds of combat reports, captured this realization in his post-war memoir. The captured Corsair showed us the future of the war more clearly than any intelligence report or battlefield defeat. It was not just a superior fighter. It was proof of an industrial superiority so vast that victory through conventional means became impossible. Some senior officers understood this by mid-1943, though many refused to accept it. Those who saw clearly began preparing Japan not for victory, but for a final defense of the homeland. This recognition led directly to fundamental shifts in Japanese strategy. Resources were increasingly diverted from offensive operations to homeland defense. Fighter production prioritized interceptors over long-range escort fighters. Training programs were shortened dramatically, producing pilots with minimal skills but in greater numbers. A desperate attempt to match American quantitative advantages at the expense of qualitative superiority that had been Japan's early war strength. None of these measures succeeded. The industrial gulf was simply too vast to bridge, and it widened with each passing month. By early 1944, American factories were producing fighters, bombers, and naval vessels in numbers that would have seemed impossible in 1941. A single American factory could outproduce entire Japanese industries. The story of the captured Corsair illuminates a fundamental truth about modern industrial warfare, that wars are ultimately won not just on battlefields, but on factory floors, in research laboratories, and through logistical systems. The Corsair embodied American industrial might at its most impressive. Innovative design translated into mass production with quality control that Japanese manufacturers could only envy. October 12, 1943. Naval Staff College, Tokyo. Commander Minoru Genda, the tactical architect of Pearl Harbor, stood before a room of staff officers, many of whom would soon command fighter units in the desperate defense of the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Behind him hung detailed diagrams of the F4U Corsair, extracted from the technical examination reports. "Gentlemen," he began, "you must understand the nature of the opponent we now face. The Corsair represents not merely a superior fighter, but a transformed method of warfare. The Americans have created an industrial system that produces not just aircraft, but entire air forces in the time it takes us to train a single pilot group." He pointed to production statistics projected on the wall, numbers that had been classified as secret just months earlier, but were now shared with field commanders who would face the consequences directly. In the time required for this lecture, approximately 2 hours, Vought will produce between 4 and 6 Corsairs. In those same 2 hours, our entire aviation industry will produce perhaps 1-0. This is the reality you will face in the coming battles. Genda continued with a brutally honest tactical assessment. Our standard interception tactics, developed for fighting numerically equal or inferior forces of less capable aircraft, are now obsolete. You will face superior aircraft in overwhelming numbers. Conventional victory under such conditions is mathematically impossible. The recommendation that followed shocked many in the audience. We must husband our remaining skilled pilots and aircraft for a final defense of the homeland. Forward bases will receive minimal fighter support. Your primary mission changes from achieving aerial victory to extracting maximum cost for American advances. This stark assessment reflected the Japanese Naval Air Arm's recognition of a fundamental truth. The examination of the captured Corsair had revealed not just a superior fighter, but an insurmountable industrial advantage that made conventional victory impossible. The war had become an exercise in extracting maximum cost for inevitable defeat. In the months and years that followed, this assessment proved tragically accurate. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, later called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot by American pilots, Japan lost 365 carrier aircraft in 2 days of combat. American losses totaled 26 aircraft. Japanese naval aviation effectively ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. Admiral Matome Ugaki, who had reviewed the Corsair examination reports, wrote in his diary after the battle, "We now face what the Corsair first revealed to us, an enemy who replaces losses faster than we can inflict them, who improves quality while increasing quantity, and whose industrial strength grows even as ours diminishes." The captured Corsair's ultimate fate remains uncertain. Some accounts suggest it was destroyed during American bombing raids on Yokosuka in 1945. Others indicate it was deliberately destroyed by retreating Japanese forces to prevent its recapture. What is certain is that the knowledge gleaned from its examination profoundly influenced Japan's understanding of its strategic position. Dr. Kazuo Inamura, a Japanese aviation historian who interviewed surviving engineers from the examination team in the 1970s, summarized their collective assessment. The Corsair revealed to Japanese aviation experts that they faced not merely a formidable enemy, but an impossible one. America's ability to mass-produce complex fighters of superior performance represented an advantage more decisive than any battlefield victory. The examination of the captured Corsair thus stands as one of history's clearest examples of how industrial capacity translates directly into military power. It revealed a truth that military leaders throughout history have often been reluctant to acknowledge: that in modern warfare, production statistics can be more important than tactical brilliance or fighting spirit. Jiro Horikoshi, reflecting on the war years in his 1956 memoir, wrote, "The examination of the American Corsair should have prompted our leadership to seek peace terms while some negotiating position remained. It demonstrated beyond any doubt that Japan faced not just defeat, but annihilation if the war continued." Those who understood American industrial potential recognized this by mid-1943. Those who did not paid for their ignorance at places like Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. The Corsair itself continued evolving throughout the war. Later models produced horsepower approaching 3,000, nearly 3 times that of Japan's best operational fighters. Production rates increased, even as quality improved, with the Connecticut factory eventually producing 1 Corsair every hour, 24 hours a day. By war's end, American factories had built 12,805 Corsairs, more than Japan's entire combat aircraft production in 1944 and 1945 combined. This production miracle was repeated across hundreds of weapon systems, from aircraft carriers to rifles, creating an avalanche of material that buried Japan's hopes of victory. The captured Corsair had provided the first clear glimpse of this industrial juggernaut's full potential, a glimpse that proved prophetic in its implications. In the final analysis, the story of the captured Corsair demonstrates a truth often overlooked in military history. Wars are won not just by fighting men, but by industrial systems. Japan's examination of the Corsair revealed an opponent that could not be defeated by conventional means, an industrial colossus that converted America's vast resources into overwhelming military power with unprecedented efficiency. As naval historian Rear Admiral Samuel Eliot Morrison wrote in his official history of U.S. naval operations, "The United States did not outfight Japan. It outbuilt Japan." American victory was a triumph not just of arms but of smokestacks, the culmination of industrial potential converted to military power on a scale never before witnessed in human history. The captured Corsair, studied so meticulously by Japanese engineers in that hangar at Yokosuka, had revealed this truth years before the war's conclusion. For those who understood its implications, American victory was not just likely, but mathematically inevitable, a function of production curves that diverged with each passing month until defeat became not just probable but certain. When Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda stood before that Corsair in February 1943, he glimpsed the future of the war with perfect clarity. What he saw was not just a superior fighter aircraft, but the physical embodiment of an industrial system that Japan could not match. A system that would eventually produce not just victory, but what Japanese officials later called a material avalanche that buried us completely. The lesson of the captured Corsair echoes through military history. Industrial capacity translated into sustained production of qualitatively superior weapons in overwhelming quantities represents an advantage more decisive than tactical brilliance, fighting spirit, or even battlefield victories. It is a lesson that continues to shape military thinking 8 decades